Hello everyone, this is Axter. After a long time I'm coming back to making these videos about Lotr TCG, and today I would like to start talking about a concept called bidding. It is one of the more underestimated things people don't really pay much attention to, and it's a shame because it's definitely one of the deciding factors in a game of Lord of the Rings trading card game. It is slightly format dependent, so I'm going to talk about the most played ones, or at least from the Czech community perspective. The first one, Fellowship Block. As you know, free peoples in Fellowship Block are very strong. The companions get basically unlimited possessions, conditions and other buffs which make the company nearly invincible. There are two, or basically three, main shadows which you can play if you want to be competitive in Fellowship Block. The first one is Moria Swarm, and the second is Uruk Beatdown with Saruman, Savagery, etc. So when you are in Fellowship Block, you definitely want to go first. Why? Well, because Free Peoples is generally stronger than Shadow. So it is up to the Shadow player to try to stop you, and in an equal game where both players are equally skilled at stopping the other opponent, the one who is ahead usually wins the game, which makes sense because he goes first. With that being said, you want to bid. So what does that mean? That means that when the game starts and you decide what number to click from 0 up to 9, not to get corrupt instantly, you bid and you basically say, I'm going to now invest and get a slight disadvantage by having burdens at the start of the game, and if I bid more than you, because we don't see each other's bids before we announce how much we bid, it then creates the advantage if you come at the top of that bid, if that makes any sense. In other words, we could say that you are trying to add burdens to go first. Now, another reason why that might be a good idea is because you will start on your favorite side 1. This is very important in Fellowship Block, slightly less important in Movie Block, and probably a little bit more than in Movie Block, but it's also not as important in War of the Rings Standard. And these are the three formats that I'm going to talk about today. So in Fellowship Block, a lot of people want to start on the Prancing Pony side. The reason is they are basically greedy with their build, they play just one copy of their Aragorn, and the whole deck is built around it. You either want to play Ranger of the North and be super safe against Swarm, or you choke. That means you remove Twilight from the pool and give your opponent less resources for his Shadow. So you play Heir to the White City. There are some ways how to play around this. So either you are in the camp that plays Aragorn by the Prancing Pony, and therefore you want to start, and therefore you want to bid. So that means, theoretically, you could bid 8, right? You could bid 8 because you need to add a burden by the side, and then play Aragorn. You are on 9, Frodo is still safe because he has 10 resistance. Well, that could be done, definitely, and now we are getting at the important counter side or counterpart of this concept, and that's the Shadow ways how to punish the bidding. From what I've said so far, it would be a logical idea to just bid 8, play Aragorn, and be done with it. I go first, all the advantages are on my side of the table. So, arguments against. Most decks run at least 1 or 2 copies of Enquea, which is an amazing Nazgul and punishes not only the Free People's 6 companions on board at one moment, which is more typical, but also, as you can see in the bracket of the game text of Ularia Enquea, that if the opponent's ring bearer has 5 burdens, you can also use this ability to snipe the most valuable piece, the most valuable companion, and then you get an advantage as the shadow player. So it's this sort of back and forth, trying to figure out the right balance, and sometimes being greedy and bidding and hoping that your opponent doesn't have a copy of Enquia in his hand. That happens a lot as well. So as I said, you are either in the camp that wants to start, wants to bid and win the bid and play Prancing Pony, or you don't care. Either you have 4 copies of Aragorn in your deck, so you don't really care because he's going to be drawn sooner or later anyway, or you can also just play a version of the deck without Aragorn. There are decks like that. There aren't many of them that are competitive, but you can definitely see a deck without Aragorn and posing a threat to the other competitive fellowships in the format. So what that means, if you don't need Aragorn, if you are in the other camp, you can bid in order to start on a different side, which ruins the day of your opponent, who then doesn't get to start with Aragorn from the beginning. Very often it's very devastating. It's a massive blow to the deck because a lot of cards that the opponent then draws are so-called dead cards. You don't have a companion that you could play them on, and it creates a very big disadvantage to you. Your shadow doesn't get to draw stuff, and it's just very uncomfortable to deal with. Yeah, so that can happen. Now here comes the advanced stuff that I would like to include for some players who are already aware of this. When it comes to that, and let's say that you are in the camp that wants to play Aragorn, it's your 1 copy in deck and everything is built around him, then you've got a problem, right? Now imagine if your shadow is a deck that doesn't run any of these minions that punish bidding. Well, if somebody knows that, then you are totally screwed, because not only are they going to bid more to be ahead of you, but they are also going to prevent you from having Aragorn from the start, and also they are going to get away with it because you don't play any punish in your shadow. So that's a wrong pairing, right? What you want to do is, when you have a deck built around 1 copy of Aragorn and you want to start on the Prancing Pony side, you want to secure either winning the bid, thus bidding a lot, right, and having a way to either remove the burdens or not really caring about anything that comes, like Enquia and stuff. You could have some cards that counter Enquia's ability. There are cards that exist. So you have to think about this, yeah? The deck that you are playing has its ups and downs, its pros and cons. And if you for example, ignore a very likely scenario, like your opponent outbidding you, then it could cost you the game. Yeah? The more solid opponents are going to abuse that, and you will be very sad when that happens, and it's not a good feeling. Now let's take a look closer at what the shadow has in store to punish the aggressive bidding. So Enquia we already mentioned. Now Nilia, which is another Nazgul. The culture generally is quite good at punishing burdens. Not necessarily a heavy punish. You have to think about one thing here. So let's say that your opponent plays the classic rainbow 3 peoples, which looks something like this. It's basically the good stuff companions. Your purpose is not to win skirmishes, it's more like to survive and outvalue your opponent by stealth events and other stuff that generates value in general. Yeah? So if it's something like this, and you bid, I don't know, 6 burdens, for example, and Nilia comes on board, you are going to get 4 wounds, right? You can avoid it by playing a stealth, of course, but you wouldn't have been in that scenario if you hadn't bid so much, right? So this is a perfect punish for this free peoples. Now, on the contrary, let's take a look at a completely different free peoples. Something like this, and I don't know, alliance, where is that bloody condition? Yep, Aragorn that looks like that, and then you have 3 allies. It's a massive beast suddenly, 17 strength. Does he really care about your Nelia punish? No, not really. So, again, an advanced tip, think about this. Is it safe to bid 2 burdens? Sure. 3 burdens? Yeah, why not? 4? That's a little bit dangerous already, because you have to play the Aragorn from the deck, and then you are on 5 burdens, and your opponent plays Enquia. Guess what? The high strength doesn't matter anymore, he's going to hit you in maneuver anyway. So you have to consider that, right? The amount of burdens you bid is going to be resembled in the shadow player's punish, yeah? So you have to think about all these scenarios, be aware of what punish there is on the format, and try to play around it. You want to find a balance between being greedy and being efficient. That's the perfect way how to play a card game in general. Another punish of a similar type, let's say, is Todea, the last of the Nazgul, which I have on my list today, and it gets assigned to whatever companion except the ring bearer if you can see 4 burdens. So this free peoples again doesn't suffer from it. However, if you have, for example, some vulnerable companions like Legolas and Sam and Merry and Pippin and all these little guys that get overwhelmed when assigned to Todea, then you are in trouble. Again, think about how much you want to bid. 3 burdens, alright, unless you add a burden to play Aragorn, then you are on 4 burdens anyway. So think about that. And a thing which is similar to what Nelia does is the Nazgul Sword, which gives you damage +1 if you can see 3 burdens. So pretty nice value to a Nazgul deck, but there are definitely some ways how to play around that, and again, a very big Aragorn doesn't really care about that, he defeats Nelia anyway. Last thing that I'm going to say about Fellowship block is side 9, which draws as many cards as there are burdens on your ring bearer. So this is the side that you see your opponent playing once you get to the 9th side. And if you have 9 burdens and your opponent plays Moria, well, he's basically going to play his whole discard pile and hand and deck and whatever. So you want to avoid that, ideally. A cool trick to do on the way is to kill your Frodo if you get a chance. Put the ring to Sam's hands, who then gets a fresh resistance of 5. You've just removed your burdens, you still have a living ring bearer, and you can go to side 9 without this punish, without Enquia punish, without the other punish cards that I mentioned. That's a cool thing to do. Now, let's talk about movie block. Movie block still, just like Fellowship, has a stronger free peoples than Shadow, so you want to go first. However, since it's very popular for your free peoples in general to have an alternative ring bearer, it means that you are going to have less than Frodo's standard 10 resistance. Let's take a look at an example. Here comes Gimli, who only has 5 resistance, that is 4 resistance at the core of his stats on the left, but he also says that he's damage plus X, where X equals, he's resistance plus X, where X equals his damage. So right now he's 5 resistance because he has damage plus 1. If you add Ring of Fury to his arsenal, then he gets damage plus 3 in total, therefore becoming a 7 resistance ring bearer, etc. So let's say that you bid, for example, 2 burdens, yeah? Let's say that a scenario happens that your opponent is actually playing a corrupt deck. He tries to kill you by playing cards that want to corrupt you. I don't have them on my list. The reason why is that it's not very typical. Let's say that this situation doesn't happen, yeah? You don't bid anything, you've got Frodo, and you play, for example, Ents. The notorious combination of Gandalf, Leader of Men, Forest Guardian, which you then burn by playing Saved from the Fire. Google the card if you need and are not familiar with what it is, and then you put 3 peoples of this sort on the board. So your opponent with his corrupt has to add 12 burdens in order to achieve his win condition, which is a terrible thing, which is a terrible goal to be trying to achieve. So therefore, when people think about what to play in the format, what to play in order to win a tournament, they say, okay, so what can I actually face tomorrow on the tournament? Are people going to play Ents? Well, probably yes. It's a very solid 3 peoples that doesn't have many weaknesses. So if I take Corrupt, can I win the tournament? Probably not. I can have some fun. It's going to be an NPE, a negative playing experience for my opponent, but I can have my fun, sure. But if I'm an ambitious player, taking Ents as my representative 3 peoples, taking Corrupt deck as my representative Shadow to the tournament is a wrong idea. That's why those things like Corrupt strategy as a way of punishing bidding is not on the list. However, there are some shadows which are hybrids. They can both do a bit of corrupting, do a bit of wounding, do a bit of overwhelming and other stuff. One of those examples is a typical Gollum deck. So not only does it have a version of Gollum Stinker, that adds burdens whenever he wins, which gets doubled if you have hidden even from her on the battlefield, which makes Gollum fierce. He's also strength +1 for each burden, so if you have a Frodo with, I don't know, 11 burdens, well, it's going to be a massive beast, isn't it? So you want to avoid that scenario, of course, and you have to keep in mind that your opponent could be playing a Gollum deck that gets to benefit from you bidding a lot. Another strategy that can punish it is Morgul Swarm. You can see this little guy, Morgul Brute, which beautifully synergizes with the rest of the deck that tries to apply pressure to the ring bearer, putting exerts, wounds and burdens on your ring bearer, which makes your life very difficult. And it's also a very efficient deck with very few weaknesses. People like to play that shadow for a reason. It's statistically one of the best options what to take once you are considering a highly competitive shadow in movie block format. So these two things, Gollum Shadow slightly less popular, but Morgul Swarm definitely one of the most popular shadows to play. You just have to be prepared for getting wrecked if you overbid it and you get punished by cards that already benefit from you having burdens on board. And now I am going to talk about a very important thing. If it were a video about power spikes in movie block, I would also mention 2 other important sites. The first one is site number 2, which is Rohirrim Camp, and I would say that there you have to be careful about initiative. That means keeping at least 4 cards when you go to site 2, or you could get totally wrecked by a Morgul Swarm deck or any sort Swarm deck whatsoever. But since this is a bidding video, we are going to take a look at a different power spike, but conceptually a very similar thing. The Anduin Banks site. This site says that the ring bearer, that the shadow player can remove a burden from the ring bearer and boost strength of one of its minions by 2. This is a repeatable ability. It means if you have 11 burdens, it's going to be +22 strength anywhere. So that could be very dangerous, right? Now let's take a look at a typical scenario where it matters. We've got our typical Last Alliance deck facing off against Besiegers. Let's say you've got this stuff on board, something like that. Yeah, some Frodo, and let's take a look at a typical Besieger minion. So, Great Hill Troll, there he goes, the mighty powerful weapon in the arsenal of Besiegers. So what happens normally? You don't have any burdens, perfect. You get 2 wounds for how much? 11 Twilight? Well, that's an awful trade, isn't it? So playing Great Hill Troll on side 4 on the Anduin Bank side would normally be a piece of cake. You would just get 2 hits for 11 Twilight. You can even move again potentially if you've got some tricks, if you've got some way how to heal your Glorfindel who just lost 2 skirmishes against the Great Hill Troll, and then you can be ahead. So it's definitely alright, it's not going to hurt at all. Just imagine the situation if this stuff is on board, this is your setup, and you've got 1 burden, just 1 burden. Now the troll is 16 strength and you assign him to Glorfindel because he can survive it, right? No, because the shadow player then just removes 1 burden, overwhelms the Glorfindel, and then in Fierce you probably have to sacrifice Boromir, right? Something like that. You could do some fancy stuff, you could add the strength to Frodo, etc. But it's an uncomfortable situation to be in. So why be in this situation when you can avoid it? And that's where movie block gets defined by what free peoples you are playing, what shadow your opponent is playing, and you just have to think about these situations. A troll could just totally devastate your setup on side 4 just because you were greedy and you paid 1 burden. So that's something to consider. So as I said, you have to consider that if you are playing a different free peoples, let's say that you are playing dwarves, which look something like this, then you might be safer, right? Because if Durin is bearing his typical this, he can survive the troll. Even if you have 2 burdens, he can take the hits, no problem at all, right? So with this free peoples, it's alright. But what if your opponent doesn't play Besiegers and he plays Morgul Swarm? Morgul Swarm is much harder to deal with for dwarves than it is for example, the Last Alliance or Ents. So I want to say a very important thing here. Both the bidding concept or the bidding choice of yours, as well as your starting fellowship, which is a topic for another time, are not constant. Your ring bearer never changes. You once decided that this is your ring bearer, he's part of your decklist, it's not going to change. As well as the rest of your decklist, it's going to stay as it is. But let's say that there are these companions in your deck. Let's just do it quickly, not to overthink it, just for the sake of showing you guys what I have in mind. So these are your companions in your deck. Theoretically, you know what your opponent is playing, and let's say we are going to do it in this sort of rock, paper, scissors way. Let's say that your opponent is playing a shadow that totally destroys elves, right? Like the first minion that he plays, he's going to discard both of your elves and win the game on the spot. Stuff like that doesn't happen, but just let's take a look at it from the principle, right? So in that case, if you say, oh, no, like my free peoples always starts with Glorfindel and Legolas, no, it doesn't. Today you are playing against a guy who abuses elves on the battlefield, so you might as well start with Derufin and Dervorin, right? So the concept that I'm trying to introduce is, If you know what your opponent is playing, you've either scouted them out, or you know that the player never plays anything else, he always comes to the tournament with the same old stuff, then you get to predict and you get to decide what starting fellowship you are going to use if your deck has an opportunity to build it on the spot reactively. I mean, here you can choose. If your opponent is playing Swarm and he has ways how to prevent archery fire, that Isengard guy, where is this little fella? This. He just turns off Legolas's ability, and if he's paired up with a bunch of guys that are cheap, well, then you are basically dead on side 4, and that's not a very nice thing, right? You don't want to experience that. So how to avoid that? Well, you might as well start with an Aragorn, which at least makes you or enables you, allows you to live a side longer than you would have with these two guys who do nothing, yeah, to protect your Frodo. And the similar concept can be applied to bidding. Let's say that your opponent plays the worst shadow in the world. He has no punish for your burdens, and you can just run all day long. The same thing can be said on your about your shadow against his free peoples. Like, you are playing, I don't know, a corrupt deck, for example, and he's playing Ents, and you know that you are going to lose that no matter what you do. Well, your opponent happens to have a Frodo who is only 10 resistance, but you are playing Frodo Resolute Hobbit. Now you know that there's no way in hell where he actually beats you, so you can bid 11 now, right? If you do that, your corrupt at least has a slight chance of stopping his Ents, whereas your free peoples can just run and you don't care about your burdens. So if you know what your opponent is playing, it's such a massive tool that you can use, that you can abuse, basically, to turn the tide, to just come on top of whatever matchup you are dealing with at the moment. That's a very powerful thing to consider. Now let's talk about some other cards from the movie block format, and then we jump on to War of the Ring Standard, and that's where we are going to finish today. Enduring Evil, not a very typical card to play in movie block, but there are some players who have been excellent at using Mordor culture in the format, and this can be a very dangerous thing to deal with. It is playable during the game even if your opponent doesn't add any burdens. Sorry, doesn't bid any burdens because you add burdens of your own. So you then have some material to use in order to replace the X in the game text of Enduring Evil with the amount of burdens you've already added, and thus gaining advantage off of this card. So that can be a dangerous thing to deal with, but then again, it's not in every deck. You're not going to see it in Corsairs because there are no Mordor Orcs in it. You're not going to see it in a Gollum deck, for example, yeah? So you don't have to be afraid of this if you know what your opponent is playing. I forgot to mention this fella in Fellowship block. You can definitely come across him. He's slightly less dangerous than Inquia, but he's in, I would say, almost every Uruk-hai deck, so you have to be careful about him. A slight off topic there. Now this thing, in my opinion, is a bit underestimated. You can run a copy in any deck if you know that your opponent likes to bid a lot. This is really meta dependent. If you know that there's a guy who wins the tournaments on a daily basis and he just likes to bid 11 burdens, then why not run this copy? Why not run an Enquia to your Corsair build? Because you've been struggling against this particular guy. There are definitely some ways how to punish burdens and not ruining the core of your deck if you know that it's going to increase your chances of winning statistically. then it makes sense. Easterlings, one of those corrupt-ish shadows, not in a way that they would corrupt the opponent necessarily. Such a build of this culture exists as well, but it's not very good. It can't really win tournaments consistently. But if you come across the classic Easterling Captain and Easterling Polearm sort of shadow, it can stop you very easily if you already bid some burdens. So that's something to consider. This shadow exists. It's somewhere in the middle, not the best one, not the worst one, and you would just be playing your opponent's game if you bid against this shadow at the start. Sauron is one of the cards that people like to include in their decks. I've seen it in Corsairs, Morgul Swarm, Gollum, Mordor decks, basically anywhere. You could squeeze him in anything, and he's a very good punish for Saved from the Fire decks, because you just get to use the Twilight that your opponent offers you at the beginning of the game. Just a curious fact, in the Czech meta, what happened is that saved decks became so popular that people started playing Saurons, right? So what then the saved players did, for example in their Gondor build, was that they added a version of What Are They, in order to consistently avoid any potential Saurons that might appear on the battlefield, since he's still roaming on side 2 where you normally go. And the Saved from the Fire decks using Ents have, for example, potential to react with playing Smeagol. The reason for that is that if 2 of your companions die out of those that you have pulled out, let's say this guy dies and this guy dies, well, suddenly, because you probably don't play any more copies of Ents in your deck, or any other Ents, I mean, you will not be able to play Ent Whore, because it needs to spot 2 Ent companions, and that's a very dangerous thing. So you can play Smeagol, which gets discarded, and he doesn't count among the dead cards in your dead pile, which is very important. And also you've saved that 1 extra companion, that 1 extra Ent, and now Ent Horde is playable again. So there are some ways how to work around it. You can also look for Gandalf's staff to cancel a skirmish against Sauron, but you have to figure that out yourselves as you go, after you've selected your deck that you are going to practice for the next couple of days, weeks, months, etc. Now let's talk about War of the Ring Standard, which is the last format we will discuss today. Here, finally, and that's one of the reasons why I love this format, Shadow seems to be a bit stronger than Freebie Boss. One of the reasons is that the Shadow player says what side out of his adventure path he is going to play next. The concept of mapping, like playing sides, is very familiar to experienced players of this format, and one of the most annoying things is getting Courtyard Parapet on side 2, then it getting replaced by either the Shadow player or by his free peoples, then going to side 3 again, Courtyard Parapet, and then from side 4 going to Knickerbreaker's Bog, which exerts essentially your all relevant characters, and that sucks, especially against a Shadow that likes to wound a lot. So if you go first, well, this stuff can happen to you, right? Because your opponent says that you are going to go to this side. So if you go first, you are in danger of that. So it might actually be worth it to bid in order to go second. Ooh, for typical Fellowship block and movie block players, that's such a weird thing to do. It's like, I don't know, buy a Ferrari in order to demolish it afterwards, right? But here it makes perfect sense. You want to avoid this punish. It doesn't make sense to let your opponent play his sides because he's going to use them. Alright? So, a little summarization. In War of the Ring Standard, it's more dangerous to go first than it is to go second. Yeah? Now, the punish cards in this format, I would say that the most typical shadows in this format are Forest Nazgul, then Corrupt Orcs, and the last one are Evilman Archery. And of course, you get to use other shadows from movie block. For example, Corsairs are solid, that Battle Mordor stuff with advanced orcs and minions, definitely playable as well. Also Morgul Swarm to some extent, right? So these are the most typical shadows. And there aren't really many ways how to punish directly the free people's bidding process from the perspective of the shadow cultures. Yeah, there are very few things that can abuse that. But if your opponent is playing a corrupt strategy, such as the corrupt orcs using this little fella, Isengard Underling, which takes back to your hand Bound to its Fate, which is a card that essentially adds a burden or discards a card from your hand. And the opponent gets to repeat this very often. Yeah, he then, it's a bit complicated, but he takes back this guy into your hand if you are moving from an underground site. Then this guy takes back Bound to its Fate into your hand, which you then play. And then if you have more copies of this, more copies of that, and more copies of that, and you are corrupt. That's the point. So that's one of the reasons why it's dangerous to bid. If you don't know what your opponent is playing, if he's playing orcs and you've already bid like 2-3 burdens, you've basically lost. Yeah? You are giving him an advantage. And your opponent is very happy to see that, especially because there aren't many cards in the format that consistently remove burdens. The best one is probably Yarnsmith, but it's a bit, what's the word, squishy? Is that a word? I mean, it's a very fragile. This guy is just 4 strength. Even if you add a Palando on top of him, the follower that adds 1 strength, well, he's still just 5. And if your ring bearer has, for example, 4 burdens, you assign him to remove 2 burdens. you are still on 2 burdens on your ring bearer, and you assign this guy, right? So he just plays Abiding Evil, which is the Abiding Evil, I guess, the event that likes to punish burdens, and that these corrupt orcs very often play. It would probably be a mistake not to play this card in the corrupt orc build. He plays that, then your Yarnsmith is 3, you removed successfully 3 burdens, but now your opponent has a free field. He can do whatever he wants. He's going to corrupt you sooner or later. I've already mentioned Knickerbreaker's Book, which is not a shadow card, but it's a site that shadow players like to use for its ability that punishes your burdens, and that can be a very dangerous thing. If it gets replaced, you don't want to be each side constantly moving to a side that exerts your whole board. The last thing that I'm going to mention, and this is a very important thing when you are playing against Forest Nazgul, arguably the best shadow in the format. If you have 0 burdens, this card is dead. It doesn't do anything. But say that you have only 1 burden on board, it's a very dangerous thing. So let's say that your opponent managed to put on board his typical I don't know, Enquia, Levenea, Nelia, and let's do one more. Let's do Toldea. These 4 guys, yeah? So you are with your typical dwarves on board. It's going to be a lot of wounds, but you are going to manage. But since you bid 1, Now we are on side 8 and your opponent plays this, or he has this on board as his side. Then it's not only going to be these 4 guys, but it's also going to be this guy, which he plays from this card pile at the cost of 0, because he just exerts the 4 other Nazgul. That's the Toil 2 ability that you can see in the Witch King's game text. That's not a thing that you want to happen to you. Bidding is very dangerous here. And that about sums it up. I hope it was helpful. It was both a lead-in to the fundamentals of bidding in Lord of the Rings trading card game, and also I tried to bid to add a bit more flavor for the more experienced players among you. So I'm looking forward to creating more content. Let me know if you are interested in a particular part of this. Play more PC formats, visit more Czech tournaments. The next one on the 21st of March 2026 is a War of the Rings standard format. You're going to see a lot of those that I've mentioned a while back, and I'll be glad to see you, and I'm looking forward to doing some more stuff for you guys.